I thought it would be interesting to ask a modern composer to once more try and see what you can do with a, let's say, traditional orchestra, with the traditional instruments. One of the things I would really have liked to do is add a new piece to the literature for piano and orchestra. Of course, I'd been thinking who I would like to commission, and Gavin Bryars was one of the people that I thought immediately that would be wonderful.
When you approach certain forms, history kind of is on your shoulder, and one of the challenges I enjoy is actually writing in the light of history. I'm acutely aware of music history, and I take great sustenance from music of the past. For me, one of the things which is quite important, always has been very important, ever since the early days, was the kind of, not just the instrument, but the person you're writing for. I know Ralph's a fine pianist. I've got recordings and I've seen his CV and I know what he can do. I could see that for a relatively young musician to actually have that degree of awareness of the cultural range meant that he had the right kind of inquiring mind. And the fact that also Ralph was interested in the idea of something which isn't straightforward virtuosity is something which I've always embraced in any other concerto I've done.
Virtuosity is much broader in Gavin's music, I think. It's much more about phrasing, long lines, longer structures, this kind of thinking. He leaves this space for the performer, and that is probably the reason, I think, one of the reasons why his music is always so musical, in that sense, because it's very much from the human being, and not severely only restricted from a composer's point of view.
One of the rules of thumb I've always had is to always be aware that performers know a lot more about music, certainly as far as their own performance is concerned, than the composer ever will. And always be humble. And that, for me, ultimately is how you learn about your craft as a composer, is to have that humility and accept that the performer knows better than you.
With relatively limited means, meaning not thousands of notes per second, there's an enormous intensity in the music, and it's really a story dragging you along, and that is really beautiful, and I really hope that something like that could also be part of the concerto, that like the long lines and making the piano almost sound like a voice, or like a singing instrument instead of a vocal instrument, instead of the usual way of percussive writing for the piano, which is very tempting, I could imagine, for a composer to do.
I do respect the piano, and I do love the piano literature. So the idea of writing a large-scale piece for piano and orchestra is something which I feel quite happy to take on, because it's not something which will come naturally to me. And therefore I would have to think about it rather more than if it's something which could just easily flick off my fingers. And in a way, I think it would probably be a more considered piece than almost anything else I would write.
In Gavin's case, I think it could be very new sound, a very new approach to music, and for me that would prove that that also with traditional instruments, traditional orchestras, you can actually create something completely new.